I too want to welcome the bill and thank the sponsors for putting it before us, and I think it's timely because around this period people before Profit and Stormont are also putting a bill to repeal the anti-trade union rights brought in by Maggie Thatcher many decades ago that have been implemented by the Stormont regime over the last period. So I welcome that because I think it gives us a sense that the same problems face workers all over Ireland, both sides of the border. Just to say, I believe that there's been a war waged against working class people in this country for decades, and it's often not overt. One wouldn't look at it and say, look at that war over there. It's subtle and often dressed in language that would seem to suggest otherwise. Partnership is a word that is often used, the social partnership model. But nonetheless, it's a war, and one side has been winning, and that's the employers and their backers in the state bodies and the government agencies that are directly responsible. And the results of that war are seen in the headline rates and statistics of low pay, precarious contracts, the lack of sick pay schemes and pension entitlements, the decline in union membership over the years, and the fact that a whole generation of workers entering the workforce have never known the very idea of a stable, pensionable and secure employment. It's like a pipe dream for them. It's also seen, of course, in the poor provision of all our public services, the services that workers need, the provision of decent housing, decent health service, proper public transport, etc. And in the front line of this war is the ability of workers to join a union and to have their employers negotiate with that union. In this, the state pretends to be neutral, and Minister, your response indicates something similar. That neutrality, however, contrives with employers to ensure that the imbalance between the relationship of employer and employee remains. A legal right to have your union recognised by the employer would be an important step forward to correct that imbalance, to give workers the confidence to look for the things that others in previous generations enjoyed and that are being stripped away from them: decent pay, decent pension rights, sick leave entitlements and dignity and respect at work. Now, there's another debate to be had, not in this forum, and that is about the type of union we need and whether the ones that we have are actually doing the job that's required. But that's not for this forum, as I say. But I want to use this opportunity to talk about two groups of workers that I think illustrate the point I'm making very, very well. The first is obviously Debenhams. And yesterday we saw a High Court injunction issued to KPMG, a global corporate conglomerate who very often provide assistance to this state and others to implement certain research and other things like insolvencies that are needed to be carried out. But what that injunction has done is to really insult those workers who tomorrow will be 6 months out on strike. Workers who have put their families and their own lives on hold in order to achieve their just rights. Other deputies have talked about the Duffy-Cahill report. Your government, that you were previously a member of, the last government, has failed to implement that report. And so we have 1,000 workers in Debenhams who are being thrown on the scrap heap because of your failure. And instead of your government moving to tell KPMG, the liquidators, to give Debenhams workers the priority in order of creditors, you come back here each time it's raised with more legalistic jargon to say it can't be done. Well, I want to quote Kieran Wallace, who went to the High Court yesterday. He's a highly experienced, well-versed legal representative and representative of KPMG who's on this job of liquidating Debenhams. And a couple of months ago, he actually said to us at a meeting, what is required is for the Irish government to instruct us that they will step aside as the primary creditor in the list of creditors for the liquidation. And they can do that, and if they step aside, we can push the workers up in that list of priority. But the Irish government are refusing to do it and are trying to bamboozle deputies and parties in here with legalistic jargon that we're not in a position to prove them wrong by. Now, here I want to just say a quick word about the union movement. At this point, I think the Irish Congress of Trade Unions needs to step up to the plate. It needs to demand an immediate and urgent meeting with your government, and these points need to be made to them. But I remember well in 2005, and people of my vintage will also remember, Nearly 80 to 100,000 workers took to the streets of this country for an afternoon. They literally went on strike, but it wasn't called that. It was called a day of protest to defend the rights of workers in Irish ferries. And it was an incredible occasion to stop the race to the bottom. And I think ICTU should think very strongly about doing something similar, albeit that we can't breach public health safety guidelines. We could organise a few hours or a half a day's strike to demand justice for the Debenhams workers. Lastly, I want to refer to Ryanair, the notorious anti-union company, very proudly anti-union company, who were earlier this year forced to recognise, last year actually, forced to recognise unions across Europe. And I have context of a letter here from a group of trade union reps from about 7 different countries in Europe who work for Ryanair. And they tell us there have been 8 workers dismissed during the strikes that they engaged in, 4 union reps and 4 cabin crew. The base chief in Tenerife, who was part of the strike committee, was demoted in the afternoon after a mediation took place to avoid a strike. 3 union reps were dismissed in Prague. Cabin crews in Europe describe the brilliant model as Ryanair is based on continuous disrespect for the most basic laws in terms of union rights, an illegal model that is used to hire agency workers, and continuous atmosphere of threats to workers and poor working conditions. The question to us is, how can Ryanair ask for state aid for their industry during COVID while they, in many countries, use Irish labour law to employ their workers and benefit and take advantage of that market, and have been doing so for 30 years. They are workers who are not based in Ireland, but Ryanair cherry-pick the most beneficial law and often ignore local laws in many countries. Now they are demanding that this state, they come holding their hand out to this state. And what does this state do? It rewards them by appointing the former CEO of Malta Air, a subsidiary of Ryanair, to the head of the Irish Aviation Authority. The appointment of Dermot O'Congolagh to the IAA is a disgrace. I want to finish by quoting a famous clarion call for all workers. An injury to one is an injury to all. And that has to ring through for all of us when we face the attempt to redress the imbalance between employer and worker in this country. And therefore, I think this bill deserves all our support.
Thank you.